right, now we have arrived at the final act, the third model. This is where we break away from pre-made GLB models and get truly creative by building our scene entirely from the scratch. All right, let's uncomment this. And then within it, we're going to create a new component, which is called third model. And as usual, it'll take a shared type. Paste that all over here. Okay, now let's define this third model. So let's open up the Explorer, and in the components folder, let's create a new file and let's call it third model.tsx. And then in here, I'm gonna run refce. All right, now let's define that property. It'll take a shared type, and a type of shared type is shared type. Now let's actually define this component to our scene. Control dot third model. All right, there we go. So let's head back to the third model. Let's collapse the Explorer. And what we're going to do next is we are going to replace this div with a group. All right, now let's scroll down. There we go. Now we have the black screen. And now within the group, we are going to create ground and a wall. So let's create a wall first. So within the group, let's create a mesh. And then within the mesh, we're going to define a plane geometry. And this plane going to need some sort of material. So let's define it. Mesh basic material. Now let's define width and height of this plane by giving a args equals to 10 by 10. There we go. Now it is a big wall. Now for mesh basic material, let's define a color equals to, for the moment, I'm going to say gray. Later on, we're going to make this dynamic. And let's also define a map is equals to a texture. So let's actually add those textures. So right at the top, we're going to say const textures is equals to use shared section texture. So it'll take a shared type. And then let's define a section. So we are on a third section. All right, now we have the textures. So in here, we don't need to use const mats equals to create material, which is going to take a textures, because we already created the mesh basic material here. So as you can see, this method that we have created gonna return mesh basic material. So it would be pointless to call this. So let's get rid of these. Okay, now I'm gonna copy this textures, and then we're gonna say textures dot, as you can see, it is not strongly typed. So we need to cast that texture. So let's say as record, and the keys are texture key from leap textures, and the values is 3.textures. So right at the top, let's import that 3. So let's say import star as 3 from 3. Let's actually get rid of these import create materials from leap material. Now for the texture key, we're going to say use type of shared type. And then after that, for the section, we're going to say use the third section. As you can see, we have only 3 textures path: normal, overlay, and icon. So as you can see, we have the Adidas.png, floor.normals, and smudges overlay. So let's head back to the third model.tsx. And then in here, we're going to say textures.overlay. Here we go. And as you can see, our wall has some sort of textures. Okay, beautiful. Now let's actually give this wall a position by saying position is equals to 0, 5, minus 1.3. Okay, so let's add some sort of comments here so that we know it is a wall. Now after that, let's create a ground. So right above the wall, I'm going to create another mesh. And within the mesh, we're going to create a plane geometry again. And then let's define an args of 10, 3. All right, now let's actually rotate this ground. So in the mesh, we're going to say position. Instead of giving the X, Y, Z, we can actually specifically emphasize on one axis by doing so. Position dash Y. We're going to say 0.2. And then let's say rotation dash X is equals to minus math.pi divided by 2. There we go. Beautiful. After that, let's give this mesh a material. Now this time we are not going to use mesh basic material. We're going to use mesh reflector material. So by using this mesh reflector material, we are going to create a reflective floor with a blur effect to create depth and distance. The mesh reflector materials is actually coming from Drei. This is a powerful pre-built material that simulates real-time reflection and blur. In a Drei document, you can see a lot of examples here. Now you can simply see the properties of mesh reflector materials right over here. So let's define that. So first I'm going to give it a blur equals to 330. And let's set the resolution 2K or 1K, it depends on you. So I'm going to set to 1K for the moment. And let's say mix blur is equals to 1. And mix strength is equals to 10. Let's set the roughness equals to 0.8. And let's set the depth scale equals to 1.2. And let's say mean depth threshold is equals to 0.4. And max depth threshold equals to 1.4, and metalness, let's give it a 0. There we go. Now let's head back to our project. As you can see, nothing in here. So in order to see this, we need some sort of lighting. So let's actually add an environment component right over here. And let's give it a preset of studio. There we go. Now you can see the reflection. So for example, let's change the presets to sunset, for example. Now you can see the reflection of the wall. All right. So right now, instead of using Drei's environment component, we are going to use our HDRI studio texture. We have unique pre-baked HDRI environment map for each individual shirt color. For example, a white room for a white shirt and a gray room for the gray shirt. So in order to use this HDRI, first thing first, we need to download it. So first you need to head to the Polyhaven website. And in here, you can see a bunch of textures, HDRIs, and models. So let's click on the Browse HDRI. And then in here, we're going to click on the Studio category. And then in our project, we're going to use Studio Small. You can actually download this with two extensions, HDRI and EXR. So I'm going to go ahead with HDRI with 1K resolution. You can also go for the 2K or even higher. It is actually recommended to use HDRIs up to 2K resolution for web. So I'm going to go ahead with 1K. And then let's hit the download. And then once you have downloaded, you're going to get something like this. So this is the HDRI. You can actually pan to look around. All right, now let's upload our studio texture here. All right, now as you can see, the HDRI that we have downloaded is something like this. So in order to use this HDRI texture, we need to convert this into a cube map. If you click on the cube map view, you're going to see this cross. And after that, I'm going to hit the save. And then we're going to use this version of the cube map. And if I open up the Explorer and head to the, for example, white third, you're going to have something look like this. So as you can see, the positive x is positive x.png, negative x, positive y.png, and negative y.png, and then we have positive z and negative z, which is also right over here. Okay. All right, now let's use this environment texture. So what we need to do, let's head to the third model.tsx. Now let's head to our project. Here we go. All right, now in order to use HDRI, we need to use useCubeTexture hook. As you can see, useCubeTexture gonna take a positive x.png, negative x.png until negative z.png. So array of strings. And then after that, we need to specify the path. So let's do that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this. And then let's import these useCubeTextures, and then let's define the path, which is actually coming from textures. Since we are in a gray third, and then here we have it. There we go. Textures, gray third. All right, now let's actually use this environment map. Mesh reflector material has a property of env_map is equals to an env_map. All right, now let's head back to our project, refresh it. Let's scroll down. Now you can see our environment has been applied. We can actually change it. For example, if I change the gray to white, it'll become white. And if I change it to the sport, it'll become red. So instead of hard coding it right over here, let's actually create a factory for this hook. So let's open up the Explorer, and in the textures.ts, we are going to create another object. I'm saying export const environment path is equals to an object. And then we're going to say white, this path, and gray, use this path. And if it was sport, use this path. So I'm going to add that path right over here. And finally, this is the sport one. All right, now let's head to the useTextures.ts. And then in here, right above this use modified texture hook, let's say export const use shirt inf cube is equals to a function, which is going to take a parameter of shirt type, and then it'll return that use texture hook that we have created in third model. So let's cut this and put it right here. And then we're going to say return this. So instead of using this path, so I'm just going to remove this. And then let's import this useCubeTexture from React 3 Drei. And then let's say const path is equals to environment path. And let's set that shirt type. There we go. I actually mistyped the environment map. So let's fix that first. Control-Shift-F or Command-Shift-F on the Mac. Now let's click on this button. And then let's say environment paths. All right, now let's replace it all. Here we go. All right, now let's use this use environment cube into our third model. So in here, I'm going to say const env-map is equals to use shirt inv cube, which is going to take a shirt type. There we go. If I scroll it down, you're going to see exactly the same one. So let's head to the white, for example. All right, now it has changed. But if you pay attention closely, the wall color hasn't changed because we hard code this color here. So let's actually make the color dynamic. So right at the top, right above the return, let's create a const get wall color is equals to a function that gonna return shirt colors, and then let's specify the shirt type. So we only have defined for the text. We also need to define for the wall. So for the moment, I'm just going to add the wall here, and then we're going to say if nothing was available. So for the default value, I'm going to set it to white. So let's implement that. So let's open up the Explorer and let's head to the colors.tx. And then here I'm going to say wall, the sport wall color, I want to be #2b for zeros. And for the white one, we're going to set the wall to white. And for the gray one, we're going to set the wall to #252525. Okay, all right, now let's head back to the third model.tsx and let's use this into here. Here we go. Now, as you can see, we have a white wall. Here we go. Now let's actually define some sort of textures to our mesh reflector material. Right below this environment map, let's say normal map textures dot normal. So what is normal? If I refresh the page, you're gonna see some sort of dot black. So these are normals, which is actually create some bumps in the surface. And then let's also create a overlay by saying map is equals to textures dot overlay. Refresh the page. Now, as you can see, the floor is more natural. And after that, don't forget to get rid of this environment because we don't need to use this anymore since we have defined our own environment map right over here. So let's get rid of this. All right, there we go. All right, after that, let's actually create a TV. So let's create a mesh again. And then within the mesh, I'm going to define a plane geometry. Plane geometry. And then let's actually define a mesh basic material for our television. Let's actually give it arguments of args equals to 16:9. Now let's actually scale it down because it is so huge. So I'm going to say scale is equals to 0.1. All right. Now let's also rotate it. So I'm going to say rotation equals to, I'm just going to target the y-axis. So let's say minus math.pi divided by 6. All right. Now let's define a position of 0.2, 0.65, and 0. Refresh this. All right, now as you can see, the TV has been corrected. So let's actually import the video texture into our mesh. So in order to use video, React 3 Drei provided us another hook. So we got to use const video is equals to use video texture hook. And then it'll take a path again. So just like before, I'm not going to give the creation of the texture responsibility to this component. So let's actually remove this and let's head to the textures.ts and let's define the video path. So let's say export const video textures is equals to an object again. And then we have white string again, gray one, again, and sport. Here we go. So if you're wondering where is the videos, just simply head to the textures. For example, we are on a third one, and then we have these videos. All right, now let's look at those paths. Here we go. All right, now let's create a hook for this path. Let's head to the use texture hook, and then let's collapse the explorer. And then in here, I'm going to say export const. I'm going to say use shared video texture is equals to a function. And just like before, it'll take a shared type. And this shared type is actually a shared type. And then we are going to return a use video texture hook, which is going to take a path. So let's define the path based on the shared type. So I'm going to say const path is equals to video textures. And then let's define the shared type. There we go. Let's define a path right over here. All right, before I continue, let's head back to the textures.ts. And then in here, some of you guys may be wondering why I didn't add these texture path in its own section type. For example, since this is a sport third, and then video, for example, equals to textures.mp4, and the environment map equals to this, and why I have created this separately. So the reason is all about file extensions and the appropriate React 3 Fibers hook. Our main studio textures, as you can see, contains path to image files, WebP, PNG, JPEG. These are all loaded using the use textures. As you can see, use shared section textures, use modified textures, gonna use texture hook, which is specifically designed for static images. However, video files.mp4 and cube map environments, which are a set of 6 images with no extension, requires completely different loading strategies. If we had tried to shove video path into our use shared section textures hook, which use textures, it would have failed. At best, use textures would have tried to load a single frame of the video as a static image, which is useless for us. So by separating these concerns, we keep our code clean, logical, and most importantly, functional. So to sum up, image path like WebP, PNG, JPEG gonna use texture hook, and video path like .mp4 extension gonna use video texture, and cube map path gonna use useCubeTextures. Here we go. All right, now let's continue on adding the video. So right below this environment map, we're going to say const video is equals to use shared video textures, and gonna take a shared type. And then I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this video, and then I'm gonna say map is equals to that video. There we go. Now you can see the video right over there. All right, there is a minor issue that you can see. The reflection is actually not correct. So in order to fix this, we need to say, when you are creating these textures for me, don't flip it and do not change the color space. So I'm going to say, comma, false. Let's refresh it. Beautiful. Now everything is actually working properly. All right, now for the final thing, we need to create a logo and a button. So we are not going to create it by HTML element. We are going to create it by using Threejs. So let's do that. Right below this mesh, I'm going to define another group, and this time I'm going to specify this group just for button and stuff like that. And for this group, I'm going to say HTML content in 3D. Comment this out. So within the group, let's create another mesh again. So in order to create this mesh, I'm just going to go ahead and copy this, paste that right over here, and then let's set the position to 0, 0.1. And for the z-axis, we're going to say 0. Okay, there we go. And then for the material, I'm going to say use that icon. There we go. Now you can see the icon. All right, now let's also redefine the arguments by saying 0.5 and then 0.2. Now let's also define a color. So right at the top, I'm going to say const get text color is equals to an object, shared colors, shared type. This time we're going to say text. If it wasn't available, use a black color as default. So I'm going to say get text color right over here. I'm going to paste that here. All right. So in order to see the text itself, we're going to set the transparency to true. So we're going to say it is transparent. Here we go. All right, now let's change the position of this group. So I'm going to say position is minus 0.8 in order to move it on the left side, and 0.7 in order to bring it a little bit up on y-axis. And for the z, we're going to set it to 0. There we go. All right, now after that, let's add button beneath this logo. So right below this mesh, I'm going to create another group. And this time it is actually related only button. So let's say button. Okay, now within this group, we're going to create a mesh. And then within the mesh, we're going to create a box geometry. And then for the material, we're going to use mesh basic material. All right, now let's give it arguments of equals to 0.5, 0.12, finally 0.02. Now let's define the color for this mesh basic material. So let's say get color is equals to get text color. There we go. Now let's also define the text for the button. So right below this mesh, let's create a text from React 3 Drei. And then we got to define children for the text. So I'm going to say shop with the collection. All right, now let's also define some sort of material for this. So let's say mesh basic material again. And then we're going to set the color equals to get text color triple equal to black. If it was black, then use white color. Otherwise, use black. All right, now as you can see, it is huge. So let's actually set the font size equals to 0.035. Now let's define the anchor by saying anchor X of center and anchor Y of middle. And now let's define a position equals to 0, 0, and 0.03. So where's the text right now? Let's refresh it. All right, now as you can see, everything is actually working perfectly. Let's actually rotate this a little bit. So I'm going to collapse these. So let's give this group a rotation of 0 math.pi divided by 9 and 0. There we go. Beautiful. All right, now let's actually make this button clickable. So for the group, just simply we're going to define onClick handler. OnClick. Here we go. And then we're going to say handle button click. So let's define this button click. So right at the top, right above this return type, I'm going to create a function. I'm going to say const handle button click is equals to use callback, and it'll take an event. What is the type of event? The type of event is Three event, and then let's say mouse event. Okay, and let's say e.stop propagation, and then we're going to say window.open https www.google.com, whatever you prefer. and then we're going to set it to blank. There we go. Now let's also add to the cursor pointer whenever hovers over this button. So let's say on pointer enter. So let's make it document.body.style.cursor equals to pointer. Let's try this out. Okay. Now let's duplicate this. Now this time is on pointer leave. And then let's make it to auto. There we go. Now if I click on this button, you can see that it'll navigate us to the Google page. All right, now let's check this third model for other pages. For example, for sport one. And then let's scroll down. You can see that everything is actually working perfectly. Beautiful. We can also get rid of this view canvas if you want, so that we can see the final result perfectly. So you gotta head to the view canvas, and then let's uncomment this camera rig, and let's comment this orbit control right over here. Let's refresh it. All right. Now we are getting the result. All right, now let's actually make this responsive. So head to the third model.tsx. So in the third model.tsx, right at the top, we're going to say const is mobile equals to use media query. And then let's define the max width of 2024. All right, now let's get rid of some of the imports that we don't need to use. So I'm going to get rid of these, and then environments. There we go. I'm going to get rid of this React. I'm going to bring this one up, and everything that is actually coming from the file is, I'm going to paste it right down below. Let's bring this right at the top, and as well as the React 3 fiber, React 3 Drei. There we go. Okay. Now after that, let's use is mobile here. So for the video, we got to make this even smaller for mobile devices. So the video is right over here. I want the position to be on the center because it is actually a little bit right side. If is mobile was true, then use this position. Then use this position of 0, 0.45, and 0. Otherwise, use this one. Okay. Now let's actually scale it down. So for the scale, we're going to say if is mobile was true, we're going to set the scale to 0.06, even smaller. Now after that, let's bring the button right at the top over here. So let's head to the group. All right, now for the position, because it is on the left side, we're going to make it center by saying 0. So we're going to say if is mobile was true, then let's use 0, 0.9. Let's actually bring it higher, and then 0 on the center. And let's also define the rotation. So if the mobile was true, we're going to rotate it exactly opposite of this side. Okay, there we go. Beautiful. And let's also make the second model.tsx responsive. I forgot to make those responsive. So in the second model.tsx, I'm just going to import the const is mobile equals to use media query, and then let's define a max width of 768. After that, I'm going to copy this is mobile. Let's bring that up right over here. We're going to make this entire scene of second model a little bit smaller. So here I'm going to say scale is equals to if is mobile was true, use 1.5, otherwise use 2.2. Okay, here we go. Don't worry about the positioning of the second model, because later on we are going to use scroll trigger in order to change its position. All right, here we go. Now it is actually completely responsive. Beautiful. And that's wrap on our third model. Just look at this. We have successfully built a completely custom 3D scene that's dynamic and perfectly tailored to our product.